Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well, staying safe, and as healthy as can be. I'd like to welcome you to Strategy Institute's Customer Experience Virtual Series. I hope you are all delighted to be here today with us. My name is Lakina, and I'll be your host. Today's topic is empathy, the key to great CX during the COVID-19 crisis. Over the next hour, I'll be joined by some of the top minds in CX and digital transformation. Now, before we get started, I'd like to share with you some of the features of the virtual platform. To your right, you'll see a chat and a Q&A box. Can everyone see it? Great. This is a public chat, and just like any live in-person event, I encourage everyone to engage with your fellow attendees. We are taking questions for speakers. Please use the Q&A section to post your questions, and we'll try to address them at the end of each presentation. You will also see a handout section where you'll find today's presentation for download. And lastly, we have some polls open in the polls section where your participation will help us develop future discussion. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Colin Crowley. Colin, I'll ask you to turn your camera on now, please. Great, perfect. Colin has spent over 10 years in senior leadership roles in e-commerce customer service and is proud to be the inaugural VP of Customer Experience at Freshly. He specializes in building customer service departments from the ground up. Fun fact, he is also an award-winning playwright whose plays have been performed across 15 states in the US as well as London. Colin, please welcome you to the digital stage. Colin, if you can just please unmute your mic. Thank you.
Hi there. I apologize. I was all set. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I am Colin Crowley, and yes, I am the VP of Customer Experience at the healthy meals company Freshly. Today, I'm going to be providing a case study of my experience operationalizing empathy in the customer service space. Specifically, I'll be discussing how we at Freshly have developed a quality assurance program that seeks to recognize certain qualitative intangibles, you might say, in customer service interactions and reward and incentivize agents accordingly. To start with, I wanted to provide a little bit of background on Freshly and where we currently stand as a company. For those of you who don't know or haven't heard of us, we are a healthy prepared meals company that ships fresh meals to customers throughout the U.S. We're a rising star in what they call the food tech space, as it's called. However, unlike other companies like Blue Apron and HelloFresh, we're not a meal kit service per se. We don't ship ingredients you use to cook meals, but rather we ship you fully prepared meals in boxes of 4, 6, 9, or 12. Our meals are roughly analogous to the types of meals that you would get at like a specialty marketplace like a Whole Foods or something. They're also all natural and gluten-free. And in fact, we're the largest certified gluten-free meal producer in the country right now. All you have to do is pop the meals in a microwave or the oven if you prefer, and you're good to go. At the end of the day, we really sit at the nexus of health and convenience, and we're here to help people lead healthier lives when otherwise you may not have the time to cook for yourself. While we were founded in Arizona, Freshly is currently headquartered in New York City, and we have industrial-sized kitchens, as you can see on the map there, in Arizona, Maryland, and New Jersey. And from these kitchens, we ship a little under 1 million meals a week to customers in all 48 states within the continental United States. We have approximately 1,600 employees, and 200 of those sit in customer service alone. Our customer service department spans 5 locations. We have customer service personnel in New York, in Arizona, in Maryland, and we also have 2 teams located abroad in the Philippines and in South Africa, which is where the majority of our frontline agents are currently located. When it comes to quality assurance specifically, which is the topic of this talk, we have a customer service quality assurance team headquartered in our New York office, but we also have members of that team throughout our other locations. Our team was created way back in 2016 from our early best performing agents and currently consists of 15 people. We have a QA manager, 2 senior quality assurance specialists, 12 frontline quality assurance specialists, and the frontline specialists are the ones who conduct the vast majority of monitors. Among those 12 frontline specialists, 8 work remotely in New York City, 2 work in our office in the Philippines, and 2 work in our office in South Africa. Between them, our QA specialists monitor approximately 400 contacts per week across phone calls, web chats, emails, and text messages as well. As I mentioned before, the customer service quality assurance team was founded back in 2016, very early in our customer service journey. In our current form, Freshly only came into existence in early 2015, and I joined in August of 2015. I made the decision to create a quality assurance team only about 6 months after we launched our customer service team. The arrow in the graph there shows the time at which our quality assurance team was formed, back when we only had about 6 frontline agents. This proved to be a pretty key decision because it allowed us to go through the process of asking, what does quality customer service mean for our customers? Long before bad practices could settle into our customer service organization, and early enough where it was still possible to take these key principles we defined and create a culture conducive to their realization. On that note, let's talk a little bit about this quality assurance program I've been talking about and give you some key points there. To start with, we have identified 5 key pillars or attributes that exemplify excellence for our customers, and I'll discuss those in more detail in just a moment. Agent contacts are rated on each pillar and receive a ranking based on how well that pillar is exemplified by the agent. An agent gets what we call a lower score if his or her contact failed to meet standards generally, a passable score if the contact had significant failings but wasn't entirely negative, a moderate score if the contact generally hit most quality expectations, and a higher score if the agent did all he or she could possibly do to help the customer and really exemplified excellence in that particular pillar. Under each pillar, there are 4 to 6 yes/no questions that are designed to guide our QA specialists so they know how to apply the rankings I just mentioned. This helps to maintain conformity in how contacts are judged, especially because we are judging people in a lot of areas that aren't as simple check marks. At the end of the day, the yes/no questions and the overall ranking per pillar translate into an overall score from 0% to 100%. This showcases the extent to which the agent met our quality assurance standards when handling the customer's contact. It is important to note that each pillar in our QA program is weighted differently to determine the shifting areas of focus. So not all pillars are created equal, and I'll talk about that in just a moment too. Lastly, agents receive their monitors once per week, usually on a Monday, and they discuss those with their supervisor. We do hold agents accountable in terms of their performance review on a monthly and a biannual basis, where we expect them to meet certain minimum goals in their quality assurance score. Now, I mentioned these 5 key pillars, so let's review what these 5 key pillars are. The first letter of each pillar, as you see there, is taken to form the acronym CPRO. The C stands for clear. In this pillar, we expect the agent to make sure he or she understands what the customer is asking and be sure to communicate their answer in the clearest way possible without using confusing jargon or overloading the customer with unnecessary information or things of that nature. The E stands for empathetic. In this pillar, we have defined what empathy means to us, and we expect agents to exemplify that by following certain standards, which we'll also talk more about in a second. The P stands for professional. In this pillar, we define certain best practices in phone, chat, and email support, such as not interrupting the customer on the phone, asking permission before putting the customer on hold, ensuring proper spelling and grammar and syntax and things of that nature. The R stands for rational. In this pillar, we expect agents to explain rather than just dictate to customers. to provide context behind what we can and cannot do for them, and also to hold agents accountable for explaining things correctly and framing them as positively as possible. Lastly, the O stands for outgoing. In this pillar, we expect the agent to do everything possible to assist the customer and to understand intrinsically what the customer needs, including information the customer needs to know, but perhaps hasn't specifically asked for. Back in the early days of our QA program, we used the surveying tool SurveyMonkey to create our monitoring forms for QA specialists used to monitor contacts. This was a nice, simple method that worked well for quite a few years and can work for you too if you're concerned about adopting a more expensive quality assurance software. Here you see an example of one of these SurveyMonkey surveys being used for the yes/no questions under two of our CPRO pillars that I just mentioned. Nowadays, we use a system called Playbox to manage our customer service quality assurance process and to host our various monitoring forms. This has helped to streamline the process of distributing monitors across our various QA specialists and ensuring appropriate representation of all our different offices. Here you see an example of the empathetic pillar in one monitoring form with a small window showing the overall score of this particular agent's contact based on the yes/no questions posed under each pillar and the overall ranking per pillar determined by the QA specialist. While all of the pillars of CPRO represent in some way the operationalization of empathy, the two pillars that best exemplify empathy in action are really empathetic and outgoing, because they both focus on an intrinsic responsiveness and sensitivity to the customer's needs. In one case, emotional, in the other case, informational. For this reason, we actually weigh those two pillars more than the other pillars in CPRO. You can see in this chart that empathetic and outgoing together account for almost 50% of a contact's quality assurance score. Let's discuss now what yes/no questions guide decision-making under these pillars so you can see how we try to put standards around certain key components of empathy. In the empathetic pillar, here are the yes/no questions that we ask to determine the ranking of a contact. First, did the associate use an appropriate opening, closing sentiment? We standardize what we feel is an appropriate way to open and close a contact. We expect all agents to greet the customer and thank them for their contact, for instance. And we also expect agents to have a pleasant sign-off when they end a contact. Second, did the associate refer to the customer by their first name? We are aiming for a congenial, friendly relationship with customers, and we don't want customers by default being called sir or ma'am unless they do prefer that. We instead prefer that agents use the customer's first name, and at times have even mandated that the name should be used more than once in certain contacts. Third, did the associate apologize for the issue or concern conveyed by the customer? This may seem pretty basic, but we've discovered that some agents simply don't take the time to apologize, and not only apologize, but apologize for the customer's specific concern rather than submit a generic templated apology. This shows the customer that we're listening and that we're investing in them individually and their specific concern. Fourth, was the overall tone used by the associate appropriate based on the customer's tone? This is more of a judgmental space, but we have outlined standards and examples for agents when it comes to matching the customer's tone and general training on tone as well. We use this question to determine whether those standards have been followed in the course of a contact. Fifth and lastly, did the associate take all opportunities to showcase his or her personality and personally connect with the customer? Bottom line, we want our agents to be people, not robots, and we want to make sure that agents take the opportunity to insert personality into conversations. We would expect, for instance, if a customer mentions a recent wedding anniversary or birthday, that the agent congratulates the customer or wishes him or her a happy birthday. We also give brownie points if agents share a truthful, relatable experience with a customer that helps to create an emotional connection. In the outgoing pillar, here are the yes/no questions we ask to determine the ranking of a contact. First, did the associate answer all of the questions and concerns raised by the customer? we want to make sure that no concern of the customers, either stated or implied, remains unaddressed in the course of a contact. It can be very, very easy for things to fall through the cracks when agents kind of live in template land and just rely on pre-written configurations to connect with customers. Second, did the associate proactively supply all information needed by the customer, even if not asked? We discovered that it's not necessarily good enough for an agent to address a customer's concerns solely, but that he or she should also understand the customer's needs as well, so that they can address questions that haven't even been raised yet. An example in our particular case would be how we mandate that agents emphasize to all customers that we are a subscription service, because we know a lot of new customers forget this fact or gloss over it during the checkout process. We also expect agents to emphasize to new customers the weekly deadline by which they need to make changes to their next order of meals, because the turnaround time can be unexpectedly quick and can catch some people off guard. So we want that information proactively delivered to customers based on the stage at which they exist in their life cycle. Third, did the associate do the maximum possible to assist the customer during the exchange? We want to make sure that the agent uses all the tools in their toolbox to address the customer's needs, leaving no stone unturned. The customer may not know what agents can do to help them, but of course we know what agents can do to help them, and we do expect those tools to be utilized. Fourth, did the associate correctly complete all follow-up work related to the customer's issue? Here, we just want to make sure that the agents follow through on everything they have promised that they would do for the customer. If they promise that they would provide a credit, we want to make sure the credit is processed. And if they promise that they would follow up with the customer after a certain period of time, we also want to make sure that that is done as well. Fifth, and lastly, did the associate extend an appropriate resolution or compensation as early as possible in the conversation, offering the good news first? In this question, we specifically speak to the fact that resolutions for the customer need to be visible, proactive, and upfront, not buried deep down in the contact, so that customers understand we have their back and they're not left wondering as to how we can help them. We don't want customers to feel otherwise that they have to slog through too much verbiage in order to get to the rub of what we're trying to tell them and what we can do to assist them. In these two charts here, you see historical changes in customer satisfaction scores in Freshly customer service as charted against the average team CPRO scores during that same period of time. This data is taken from our earlier days when the impact of our QA program was the most impactful. That's, of course, because we were growing our team actively during that time and really trying to define the standards of what made great customer service, and when we had less training resources available. We saw a strong correlation between rising satisfaction scores and rising CPRO scores, as you can see on the chart. Tracking these two scores has been key for guiding us in adjusting our quality assurance program to meet customer needs over time, and of course to increase overall customer satisfaction. Before I go, I also want to address one last issue, namely how we maintain consistency and validity in our QA monitoring, and also how we ensure agent buy-in into the process, because that's obviously an important part of the legitimacy of this program, namely that agents feel when they're rated that they are rated fairly and according to standards that are well advertised and well thought out. First, all QA specialists are themselves QA'd through a specialist-specific CPRO process to ensure accuracy in monitoring. Obviously, our QA program and many QA programs rise and fall on the accurate application of their principles and their policies, and especially so when you're dealing with a lot of intangibles and you're trying to operationalize those intangibles. So we regularly monitor and schedule biweekly calibrations with our QA specialists to ensure they are applying principles and concepts correctly and consistently, and also, like I said, making sure they themselves are a part of their own monitoring process and are held accountable for the monitors that they do produce. Second, the quality assurance team at Freshly owns templates and everyday CX content to ensure that they all meet CPRO standards. Because the QA team really understands excellence better than anyone, they are also responsible for managing all talking points and templates submitted by other teams within our customer support department to ensure they meet CPRO standards before being released to the general agent population. And this also helps to ensure that when there are important updates that need to be sent out to agents and talking points that have to be presented, that they're vetted, that they're pretty well vetted beforehand, and agents feel more comfortable being able to use those talking points. Third, there is a bi-weekly meeting that we have between our quality assurance people and operational leaders in customer service to ensure a ready dialogue for new issues requiring monitoring or clarification. We want to make sure our QA team doesn't live in isolation from frontline operations, basically. So we make sure that there's a regular communication where our frontline leaders can raise questions or concerns about standards and procedures so that these can be adjudicated in some open forum, and there can be general agreement on how quality assurance principles should be applied and realized or changed, as the case may be, if we find certain principles are unfair to agents or not accurately getting us the results that we anticipate. Fourth, a QA dispute process exists for agents to be able to dispute any score they receive. It's important to make sure agents feel empowered to dispute scores that they feel are inaccurate, as well as to use this process to keep a check on our quality assurance specialists and contribute to the rating that those specialists in turn receive for the work that they output. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, we need empathy for agents as well as for customers. And it's important, especially when you're working in a world of intangibles where it's less simple than did someone, use this person's name, check. We have to make sure agents buy in and understand why we're applying certain standards and principles and why we expect them to institutionalize those standards and principles in their own mindsets. That's it. That's a basic rundown of our quality assurance program and customer service, and how we have tried to operationalize empathy in some of those intangibles. So happy to answer any questions if people have any.
Thank you so much, Colin. We do have one question from the audience, but I'll also take a moment here to encourage anyone who has any questions from Colin's presentation to just post in the Q&A. The first question we have is from Morris P. Morris is saying, surely, Colin, there is no such thing as 100% in any of these pillars. How do you score better than clear or empathy, or what score is made the customer angry?
I'm not entirely sure of the nature of the questions, but let me try to get it right. There's definitely true that in terms of what makes for a 100% pure experience can shift with different circumstances and can shift with different contacts. In our particular case, we sometimes find contacts that do hit 100% in terms of meeting our internal standards, which typically match well with satisfaction standards. If anything, we find that QA scores tend to be underneath satisfaction scores, where customers are usually more generous with our agents than the QA specialists are, because the QA specialists have more understanding of what the agents could do to assist customers, whereas customers may not have that understanding. And of course, clearly don't, although they may have some sort of inkling. So it's definitely just very, very hard to get 100% in terms of our scoring system. And I should also mention that another thing we have too, to kind of weight that down, is although it's less relevant for empathy per se, but we also do have what we call fail-alls or auto fails, where there are certain things that an agent has to do in the course of a contact that's so crucial that if they don't do that, then they automatically get 0 scores in all the pillars. And those are very extreme situations, like if an agent promised they would process a refund for a customer and they didn't, as an example. So we have those defined as well, which also help to take egregious circumstances and give them due weight and due account. So they're not just a small ding among many other attributes that are valued. So I'm not sure that answers your question, but it's definitely true. It's very hard to get 100% in our scoring system because there are all these different yes/no questions asked under each pillar. So it's not just a blanket, check empathy, check clear, check professional, but rather the yes/no questions that the specialist uses to determine the ranking in each pillar determines what score the agent receives.
Great. We have a question from Nigel N. Have you ever thought about supplementing live customer support with chatbots?
Yes, we have worked with chatbots, and we have a sort of a lower level chatbot on our site right now. So we have done that at different times in our operations, and are in the stage as a company where we are doing that more full throttle now, and are more interested in doing that full throttle. And that's mainly, of course, as the case is for many different companies, to take the frontline relatively basic issues away from agents that could otherwise very easily be answered through an FAQ article or a simple preset conversational framework, so that the issues that are more complex and more complicated and that do require human interaction, and that, of course, very importantly, do require human empathy to resolve the customer's issue or mitigate their concern, that those issues are reserved for agents, and that those issues can be more escalated to agents faster than would normally be the case.
Okay, we have time for one more question from Lisa M. Do agents own the contact through to resolution, or do they just complete their part and pass it through the system? For an example, refund or callback. And are customers able to contact specific agents, or are they routed to whoever is available?
That's a good question. We do expect agents to handle issues holistically, and there could be some exceptions to that, to the extent that, let's say an agent is dealing with a customer, and the customer emails us back or calls back on a particular day the agent isn't available. Then obviously we wouldn't just leave the contact sitting there, so the customer has to wait a long time to receive any sort of response. So in those particular cases, a contact would be reassigned to an agent who is otherwise available. But aside from those circumstances, the idea is, yes, we as much as possible want to keep contacts within the same pairing of agent and customer. So the customer feels that they're dealing with someone who has an understanding of what their concerns are. In terms of calls, we don't have a system where, just because of the sheer number of calls coming in, we don't have a system where if you call in and you previously chatted with another agent, that your preference to refer to that agent. But we do allow agents to make proactive callbacks. So if there's ever a case, of course, where like a customer asks to speak with a specific agent and only a specific agent, then that agent is able to call the customer back. And so forth. But we don't have it built into our system as it stands now, primarily just because of the sheer number of calls we have coming in, and that our priority at a given time is to make sure customers are answered in those calls as quickly as possible.
Great. We actually do have one more question. We have room for one question. This is actually a very good question from Valerie B. What did you change on customers' journeys to guarantee this empathy?
Yeah, that is a very, very good question. That's a tough one because it kind of depends on the different areas you're talking about. I mean, I would say there are a few different areas that we tweak to improve empathy. One, obviously, is in the very nature of this quality assurance program, because it's what I'm presenting to you is not static, which is to say it has changed over time. And we've gone through periods where we have different yes/no questions under these different pillars. And we've adjusted those to fit certain realities, either because we notice certain challenges cropping up here and so forth. And that's also where the weighting comes in. So we've changed weighting in pillars over time and advertised that very specifically to agents, in order to make it clear to them that this is where we want you focusing your concern, and so that they know that if they do focus their concern more on empathy, then that is something that will ultimately benefit them when it comes time for a performance evaluation, because that will impact their scoring in QA. So the QA program is one way we've been able to kind of shift things to address empathy issues during different periods of time. I would say a second area outside of the QA program, but also linked to it, is working hard where we can to find scrappy manual workarounds to some types of issues. Because obviously one challenge a lot of companies have just comes down to the limitations of technology and what agents are allowed or enabled to do for customers, and sometimes just the limitations of operations. in and of themselves. We have very strict procedures in our various kitchens that ensure we're able to turn out a large number of fresh meals essentially on the fly. So it's a very finely run process, but we have certain circumstances where, we have customers who are in pretty desperate need of meals because they were depending on our meals and there was an issue with a carrier and their meals couldn't be delivered on time and now they're spoiled and now the person would naturally have to wait until the next week to receive meals when their next order processes. So we've tried to develop different manual workarounds to some of those things and enforce those through our QA process. An example would be we've taken our customer service people and recently increased this, where we have some customer service people who live and exist in our kitchens where they can manually pack boxes of meals to send out to customers. So aside from our technical process and aside from our normal operations, we have customer service people on the ground who can take escalated situations and make sure that we have some way to get meals to customers who are really, really needy. And the QA program is a good example of how when we have a new change like that or a new procedure like that, and we want to make sure that that option is appropriately presented to the right customers, the QA program is exactly an example of how we would do that. That, as an example, would fit under the outgoing pillar in terms of did you do everything possible to assist the customer? So if there's a clear situation that meets the standards we've outlined where a customer should be offered one of these boxes, we would use the outgoing pillar in our QA program to police for that, essentially, and to give credit to agents who appropriately make that offer, and also to coach agents who do not make the offer. I would say a third thing, not to get too long, but a third thing really comes down intrinsically, again related to QA, but a little separate from it, to having a program of continual training. One thing we put a lot of emphasis on, especially because we do use agents abroad, and again, that's where our frontline contacts are generally handled. But we have a big training emphasis very early on, and had that even pre-existing our use of outsourcers, where our training program is 4 to 5 weeks. That seems very large to people, but when I add the context that the training team controls the ramp-up process as well as the immediate training process. So they're actually in charge of the new hire's journey until they're 100% ready to hit the floor, as opposed to being in charge for a week or 2 weeks, and then you're passed off to your supervisor and you ramp up from there. And that's to have constant oversight over how the agent is performing and to make the training process more staggered so that tidbits of training and development can be institutionalized throughout that 4 to 5 week process. That's been huge in being able to set a certain groundwork for us about excellence when agents hit the floor, especially using agents abroad, where there can be more challenges in making sure empathy gets right when you're dealing with a culture that is more formal and may not want to call customers initially by their first name and may want to say sir and ma'am. So that's helped us out tremendously in that case. We also put a big emphasis in training on continual training. So we have weekly and biweekly quizzes, many of which deal with things like tone and empathy. So we try to make sure that the soft skills are included in those trainings on a regular basis, and agents are held to account for those. And speaking about that same feedback loop, anything that goes through training is also something that, of course, we're looking at in the QA process. And sometimes we're premiering something new, like a new principle as to how to deal with X, Y, or Z circumstances because it's best for customers and most empathetic. Then the training team would premiere that standard, and then the QA program would be adjusted to enforce it going forward after approximately 5 to 7 days, where agents get the opportunity to acquaint themselves with it and get comfortable using the new standards, after which they're held to account for them.
Wonderful. Thanks, Colin. We are going to move into our panel discussion next. And Colin, I'll just ask you to stay in the room with your camera on and just mute your mic. And right now, I'd like to welcome our panelists to please turn your cameras on. And I'd like to welcome Kent Lawson, who's the Executive Director of Brand and Customer Experience with the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association, Andrea Penn, the Director of Client Experience at KeyBank, and another welcome for Colin, Joining us as our moderator today is Greg Melia, CEO of CXPA. Now, before we get into the conversation, I'd like to have each of you introduce yourselves. If you can briefly tell us about your organization and your role. Kent, we'll start with you.
Hi there. Welcome. Thanks for having me. My name is Kent Lawson. As was said, I'm the Executive Director of Brand and CX Consumer Experience at Blue Cross Blue Shield Association. The association is sort of a license holder for the Blue Cross Blue Shield brand, and we've got 36 plus independent organizations, independent companies that are license holders under that brand. So we are looking over the entire system as it relates to customers using health insurance under the Blue Cross Blue Shield brand. I grew up sort of as an industrial designer and have lived at the intersection of design, innovation, and healthcare for most of my career. And I think consumer experience, customer experience, and especially empathy is so important in what we do, certainly in healthcare, but across all industries, as certainly as Colin showed us. Thanks.
Wonderful. Andrea, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. As we said, my name is Andrea Penn, and I'm the Director of Client Experience at KeyBank. KeyBank is a regional bank that's located in the northern part of the United States. We have approximately 1,100 physical branches that are located all the way from Alaska to Maine and all the way in between. So again, in the northern part of the United States. In thinking about my role with Key, my responsibility is to understand how our clients are feeling in regards to the processes that we put in place, the different policies that we have. And over the course of the past several weeks, we've seen a lot of our policies and processes stood on their head as a matter of responding to the coronavirus pandemic. So I look forward to talking with all of you today.
Great. Greg, I'll hand this over to you now as Greg will be moderating the panel. Thank you.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. Greg Melia, CEO of the Customer Experience Professionals Association. We're the global organization for people who do what you do, which is to help your brands use customer experience as a differentiating brand strategy. We also are the group that issues the Certified Customer Experience Professional credential. So when you see CCXP after people's names. As I listened to that dissertation, Colin, congratulations. That was an awesome learning experience for all of us. It was clear that this is a journey that you've been on for a while, and you've been leading Freshly for a while. And I know that that's true for Kent and Andrea as well. I wanted to start off by asking, what's changed in the last 7 weeks in terms of what your customers and what your stakeholders are looking for? Kent, can we start with you?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Quite a bit has changed. I mean, the whole focus has moved from daily life to healthcare in some way. And what I found really interesting over the past 7 weeks is that we have spent the last 5+ years trying to get people to use telehealth or virtual doctor services. And it's been with a very low uptake. And if anyone's ever tried to use that before the COVID pandemic, it felt a little funky. It wasn't sort of our first go-to. From a healthcare perspective, I think most patients or most customers really wanted sort of that hands-on, person-to-person, human-to-human contact. And what has changed over the past 7 weeks is now people are saying, wait a minute, the risk burden is different now. And I don't necessarily want to go out. I don't want to be exposed to, especially someone in healthcare that's already being exposed to the virus. And so we're seeing a big uptick on both virtual health, virtual doctors, as well as telehealth, as well as even the chatbots, and getting people to the right doors and sort of triaging at home before they actually take the step out of their house. So it's been fascinating and really good. And actually, Andrea and I, as the panel talked before, it's in a lot of ways, it's what was happening in the finance industry is finally starting to happen in the healthcare industry. And that is, let's do what you can on your own and virtually until it's time for that human-to-human perspective or connection.
Yeah, that's awesome, Kent. Just to reiterate, people have a different need now. Now they need to see a doctor, and they don't want to go and have that in-room experience. And so kudos to your team for that pivot. Andrea, you were sharing some neat things about how you guys are adjusting and then also continuing to have certain commitments to how you deliver a service experience. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And Kent, what you were saying, and when we talked earlier, how much the transformation from being in person to digital experience just really resonated with us in the financial world as well. We have been working over the course of the past decade to migrate clients from an in-branch experience to working with a teller to be able to use some of our more digital platforms. And that can be anything from your mobile phone to online banking to even the ATM. We consider all of those part of our digital experience. And we have absolutely seen, as part of this pandemic, clients wanting to use those types of non-human interactions in order to make their banking experience easier. I have a quote that I'd like to read from you. I just read it this morning from a client of ours, and it states, "It was the first time I tried to deposit a check via a mobile app on my smartphone. Worked like a charm. I'm a senior and appreciated not having to unnecessarily expose myself during this pandemic." I selected that quote to read to all of you because I think that it really exemplifies that group of clients that we were really struggling to move towards the digital space. He called it out himself that he's a senior and wasn't necessarily something that he was clamoring to do pre-pandemic. But now that we are in this space, that we are trying to limit the amount of contact that we have, he's really moved towards this. So that's one of the items that we're doing. And as you all know, I know I'm not, in a bubble here at Key with our move to closing all of our lobbies, to moving our banking transactions to be through the drive-through only. And we've also seen an uptick in the amount of calls that we're taking to our call center. So we're really moving towards a different banking experience. And we, of course, want to continue to see our clients. We know that that's so important to them. And that's the type of feedback that we're seeing as well, is that our clients, even though they can't come in and see us, they really appreciate the recognition that they're getting through the teller line. If you can imagine yourself driving through a teller line and having to look through the window at your favorite teller who gives your kid a lollipop every time you come through, or your dog a snack. It's just different. And that's where we're trying to meet our clients where they want to be met, which is through that experience, which limits the exposure.
And so I thought that that's a really great point, is that this opportunity to introduce new CX practices, if it is positioned in meeting the customer's needs, is a great opportunity for us to accelerate and build a long-term relationship. We want people to feel like we're doing something for them rather than to them. That's the key there. Andrea, I want to ask you about that experience, and if you've changed any of the metrics when somebody comes through a drive-through window. How is that experience different today than it was 8 weeks ago?
I think that the biggest change is that clients are, and I wouldn't even say this is a change because, and again, all of you are consumers, all of you have gone through a bank drive-through, guaranteed. And the biggest frustration is long lines. It is very frustrating to sit in a long line of cars, especially when you think about how much space a car takes up, and it can easily wrap around the building. That has been a challenge. And I think not just for Key, but for all banks, is how do we manage those expectations, knowing that it's the only way that we can have our clients bank right now. So we have, been testing out some different things. I know as a consumer myself, and I'm not sure, I see in the chat where some of us are from, some from Canada and different places, but a local fast food chain in this area is Chick-fil-A. I'm sure some of you have Chick-fil-A's in your area. I think they've really nailed the drive-through experience. I encourage you to go through their drive-through right now. They've done an excellent job with meeting the customers where they want to be met. And that is a matter of taking orders from different people. So it's not just a one-to-one anymore. They've got 3 people taking orders and then all sorts of people delivering. And I give that as an example because I think that's where all of us are going to be pivoting towards, is how can we do that, but still confined with the regulations that we have. I'm by no means saying that banking is as easy as ordering a chicken sandwich. It's much more complicated and highly regulated. So we'll have to do something in that space. But that's the type of stuff we're looking at.
Yeah, that's a really interesting area there. Colin, I want to circle back to you for a moment. How has the role that Freshly plays in people's lives changed with the onset of the pandemic? And how does that change the types of emotions they bring when they're contacting your staff?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for us, as you can imagine, because we are a healthy prepared meals company, we've seen a pretty significant rise in demand as people are hunkered down and self-quarantine and so forth. And we've tried to accommodate that in many ways by expanding our capacity above and beyond what we were initially planning for this time of the year, to be able to service as many customers as possible and get meals out to as many people as possible. And we've had some great success with that. But we definitely see a significant rise in demand. And like I mentioned in the presentation or in the question and answer session, we also see a rise in escalations related to issues like failed delivery. Definitely the circumstances under which customers live change their perception of everything and change how much they need and depend on your product. And we've seen a lot of that, because whereas in the past, if someone had a failed delivery for whatever reason, that was clearly a terrible inconvenience, and we would compensate fully and offer the customer some additional compensation on top of that. But now we have circumstances where, because people just can't go to the supermarket and get meals or get ingredients to cook meals when they otherwise were depending on meals from us, that's really ramped up those circumstances for people. It's not as it's inconvenient enough to have to go to the supermarket to get some ingredients you weren't initially planning on, but it's even more so in this particular environment where people are trying to stay safe and stay hunkered down. So we've tried to adjust, as I mentioned in my example, with what sort of manual workarounds can we do to try to help people, and how can we try to push more special boxes out the door to people to assist. I would say another big theme for us, because some of the other challenges related to COVID haven't resulted in changes per se for us. We were always a digitalized experience, so we never had a brick and mortar. So we were already fully e-commerce, so to speak, when this hit. And even though our entire team wasn't fully remote, which they now are, we had a lot of experience with remote work because of our teams abroad, since we essentially treat those agents as if they're de facto our own agents, and we engage with them very, very heavily. So the remote work hasn't been as much of a tough transition. I'd say one of the big things that stands out is the extent to which transparency as a general theme has become a more important component of empathy in this current environment than would normally be the case. And we feel that like the food safety space, because the first question that we get from a lot of customers in this particular pandemic is, well, how do I know that your meals are safe, right? And how can you ensure my health and well-being? And typically, we've always been very stringent in having food safety procedures in all of our kitchens and meeting FDA standards and so forth. But in the past, that was always one of those areas where we thought, well, we shouldn't really discuss that too much with customers, because it kind of puts negative thoughts in people's mind about talking about food safety and what may happen and things like that. And also to overload customers with information they don't need. And then there's always the component where the more public you are with your business practices, then the more the competitors can get a sense of what you're doing. So we were always kind of reticent in talking about food safety, and we didn't really introduce it as a common topic in our FAQ as an example, and more reticent in telling agents as to what they should be saying about that. But in this current environment, that's changed tremendously, and in various areas we've gone above and beyond to be much more transparent, knowing that customers, especially now, need that level of transparency for their own sense of comfort and security. So now we have very, very detailed FAQ about food safety procedures. And I was talking about a chatbot before, so we built some of those conversational flows into the chatbot so that information is readily available for customers. And we've added a pre-recorded blurb in our main phone line if you're interested in hearing how we're dealing with COVID-19. So, and I think that's a really good thing, that it's kind of emphasized the importance of transparency and the important part that transparency plays in being empathetic to customers and understanding their needs.
So across all three of the strategies and approaches, I noticed that some of it is about taking your CX program, it's understanding your customer needs, it's having the technology, but the critical point is always seems to come back to the employees that are delivering. And so I wanted to check in and ask, what are you doing differently in terms of your employees to think about their needs and to think about how you support them as they undergo some of the same challenges that our customers are facing as well? Kent, do you want to begin?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. What's been really interesting to me that's sort of built into your question is, the CX folks, the CX teams across our system have been very focused on consumers, customers, those people that are carrying the Blue Cross Blue Shield card in their pocket, right? More and more these days, and especially since over the past 7 weeks, we've seen the HR organizations, the CHROs coming to the CX teams, and because you've got the built-in empathy, the CX teams tend to be those people that have empathy as part of their DNA. And so these the HR organizations in these, some of them are very large companies, are going to the CX teams and saying, help us bring empathy, help us think through, maybe it's how do we bring our employees back in a smart and meaningful and emotionally stable way? How do we talk to our employees in a way that doesn't get them upset or frustrated, or makes them feel empowered and ready to continue to be productive and continue to take care of their own life? Because a lot of my team has small kids, and they're wrestling, they're doing their schooling and their work during the day. So their professional lives have really expanded from 6 a.m. in the morning until 8 at night. But that's because they're wearing both of those hats, juggling those hats throughout the day. So the HR organizations are definitely coming to the CX people because of that empathy within the DNA. And it's been just absolutely marvelous. I think we are going to come back from this in a much better place with a much higher degree of empathy across the organization, not just for our customers, but for our employees, top down.
I love hearing that. Colin, I'm going to go back to you because, Andrea, I know my next question that follows on for you as well.
No, I would entirely agree with that. And especially during this period of time, it's important to understand that customers have concerns, but also agents have concerns too. And I guess the good analogy is the oxygen mask in the airplane type of thing, where you need to make sure that you're okay before you can help your child. And it's kind of similar with agents. I think it's fair to say that you have to make sure your agents are doing okay, or otherwise they can't help the customers to the best of their ability. And that's especially true when it deals with something which is as intangible as empathy. If it's something where it's just a matter of checking things off in a checkbox, that's something that people can process whatever the weather. But when you care about things like tone and just intrinsically being able to understand customers, agents really need to be in a good headspace to be able to do that and to be able to react in real time to customer needs. And if they're not in that headspace, then you're not going to get the service level you expect for your customers. Our challenge in that regard has mainly been in shifting all of our agents to remote work status, including everyone who's abroad, which occurred also quickly. So which was an additional challenge, because there's obviously challenges in moving people from being in an office setting to a remote work setting. But you have additional challenges if you're doing it quickly, which is what happened in our particular case. So one thing that we have tried to do to keep up agent morale is, well, really a few different things. The first is we're conscious of the fact that many of our agents aren't necessarily, because they weren't planning to work remotely, they're not necessarily as comfortable as they would normally be had they had the ability to sit there and plan it out. So we've taken it upon ourselves to offer every agent from this marketplace of items the ability to have us buy something for them that would make their work from home life easier. So if you want a chair, a nice fancy chair, for instance, or a ball chair, or you want a desk, and so forth. So we have this little marketplace of items literally that you can go through and you can choose something. So we're trying to make that workspace a little bit better for agents, knowing that workspace has a lot to do with their comfort as they sit there every day. Another thing that we've tried to do is be very engaged with our agents whenever possible. So we have someone who fills the role of a community manager, as we call her, who's really responsible for culture overall. And she's been great at coming up with different types of fun, engaging programs to make people feel they're part of a larger team, so they don't live in isolation. Because definitely you kind of miss that office hum and the convivial environment you can get when you can banter with people next to you, especially when you're dealing with stressful circumstances or angry customers, and you need the ability to be able to let off some steam or have someone there to kind of talk you down and make you feel better. We've done a lot of fun little things where we've passed around this thing where people do quarantine videos, as an example, where like 1 to 2 minute little videos of themselves that we share in our daily morning memos to all our agents. And people talk about how they are surviving quarantine, and people have had a lot of fun with that. Some people getting a little bit exuberant, adding like music in the background and things like that. But it's a great way to make people feel connected. And we did another activity where we had like an Easter egg hunt, we called it, where agents were tasked with going out and connecting with different people from different offices and trying to find someone who fits certain characteristics, like they were born in March, for instance, or they have a step sibling. And if you can find someone who meets all 20 of those characteristics, then you get a prize at the end.
That's
so
awesome.
We try to do things like that, and it's keep people engaged and help to add the levity, and also increase communication between our different offices. Because again, we don't want our friends abroad to feel that they're isolated from our agents in the U.S. So that's really helped in terms of morale.
That's awesome. Thanks, Colin. I love the way that you said that you wanted to provide equipment to make their job easier, not for them to do their job, but to make them enjoy that process a little bit better. Andrea, I want to come to you, and I want to ask both what KeyBank is doing for its employees, but I also want to find out, has your CX team been tapped to do anything else within the bank and to help out? As Kent sort of said, they're tapped by their HR team. Anybody else looking for your time, Andrea?
Yes. So fortunately, everyone wants to understand the client experience right now, which is awesome because it has really allowed the insights that we provide to be front and center, because everyone wants to understand, what is it that banking is going to look like in the new normal, in the new world? How are our clients going to react? What is it that they're looking for now? Where are we hitting the mark and where aren't we? So some of the things that we've done for our folks that are still required to go into the office, because as all of you know, banking is an essential item. So we do have tellers that are still working. But Key did lead the way with closing our branches to go to drive up only. And when I say we led the way in the market that we're in. And we announced that we were just going to do appointment only. And also, we have outfitted our branch representatives with masks that they're able to use and that we encourage usage in states that don't require it, as well as gloves. This is something that, and we were talking about transparency. Kent was saying this earlier, how important it is to be transparent. And that is something that I have found to be very important, is that clients just want to see that. They want to see what it is that you're doing. You know, we can certainly send out 1,000 emails. If you all remember back at the beginning of the pandemic, we got an email from every company we ever did business with slightly saying that we're here for you and we're here for our employees. And we know that that's kind of lip service. Clients want to see it. So something that's resonated with me as I've been reading through client feedback is in regards to something as mundane as cleaning the tube that you send your deposit through or your money, whatever it is, at the bank. So again, think of yourself as a consumer and you put your items into the tube thing. I don't even know what the name of it is. And it zips off to the teller, who then takes the items out of it. To see the teller physically clean it with a Clorox wipe has been something that has been so impactful. And people call it out. They are telling us that in their feedback, that they really appreciate the fact that they see that we're taking the cleaning measures really seriously, and we're not just saying that we're doing it. Something that I wish we could nail would be the cleanliness of the ATM. That's a tough one, but we're trying, and we're definitely trying to get our arms around it.
But understanding that that's a touch point that is a literally of concern to your bankers and members is an important piece. And I kind of want to ask, all of you seem to have a CX program in place before the pandemic set in. How has that helped you as you've made this pivot and you've made these places? If you were going to give advice to people, what was your CX investment that best positioned you for moving forward?
I don't know if that was pitched to me.
I was looking to see. I'm like watching it. I'm trying to decide whether
you're trying to figure out
want to catch the question or they want to avoid the question. So take it, Andrea.
Okay. Well, I think if I'm interpreting that correctly, what we did have a client experience process stood up at the beginning. So we've had it for many, many years at Key. And what positioned us to be able to listen to our clients the easiest is that we had a text analysis ready to go for our survey feedback. And that was something important. We did not stop surveying our clients. I know there was some swirl at the beginning of this, is it really the appropriate time to send customer surveys? Is it not? And we went with, yes, we want to hear the voice of our clients. We changed the introduction to our surveys by saying, we know that we are in unprecedented times, and that we don't know what the future holds, but we'd really appreciate your feedback. So we definitely changed the tone of it. But that was an important thing, was that we didn't take our foot off the gas when it came to asking for our client feedback. And then by having the text analysis in place, I was able to very easily categorize any comments that came in regarding the virus. And what I was able to quickly learn was that clients were really appreciative of the way that we were responding, but they were also providing us feedback at the same time. I gave the example of long lines. But I would say that's what really allowed us to be able to pivot and listen to our clients, was having the process in place and having strong text analytics, as well as audio analysis for our phone calls. So much like what Colin was talking about and Kent with the contact centers, the call centers, by being able to have analysis in place to translate that audio into text and really zero in on the phone calls that clients were making about the virus or their banking situation in regards to the virus, was really helpful. And it's just been really important for us for our success.
And I'm really glad to hear you say that not only did you continue your data collection on the voice of the customer, but you focused literally on the voice of the customer. So instead of just looking at the quantitative numbers, you really gave people a chance to explain their situation and to have their voice heard, and to have that define what you did. I think that's at the heart of empathy. Kent, what put you guys in good position?
So I would say, so a couple of years ago, we mapped out, we did, our journey mapping, but it was an aspirational, understanding every step of the journey for all of our business lines. And we mapped out sort of the aspirational customer journey for each of those steps. And it included functional, so what was going on functionally at this step? What was going on from an accessibility point of view? But most important to me anyway, and this goes back to the empathy, is what is happening at this step from an emotional point of view? How is the customer, how is the member feeling emotionally at this step? And how do we design the appropriate response to meet them where they are emotionally? And because we had invested in this and mapped this all out, it's been, as we sort of have transitioned to more of a virtual world right now, it was easier, I'll say, not easy. It was easier for us to go back to our journey maps and say, okay, when this moves from in-person to virtual, how does that change the game? How, is it changing anything functionally, accessibly, or emotionally? And how do we redesign for that? So we sort of had the roadmap there, and it was a matter of going back to the roadmap and understanding that there was construction on the road, right? And so, what does it mean to take a different route? And so it was money very well spent 2 years ago that is still paying dividends this year.
I'm so glad to hear that, Kent, because the number one complaint I hear with people with journey maps is that they do it and they don't use it again. And you've just given a great testament that, not only can it be used over time, but you can go back and it can start a conversation and move it to, a higher level in a quicker way. And we all know that we need to make quicker decisions now.
And I would also say that as technology changes, as industries change, as we're seeing, no one predicted this pandemic, but as we're seeing, just life in general change, you should always go back to your customer journey maps and say, what's changed? How do we keep this fresh? How do we redesign those areas that need redesigning?
Colin, tell us a little bit about what you're most thankful that you had in place when this all set in. We got to see how all the different pieces come together, but what was really key to you?
Yeah, I would say, it sounds horrendously broad, but the real key for us was infrastructure building, and the fact that we had a lot of infrastructure built prior to the outbreak of the pandemic. And by infrastructure, I mean, generally speaking, having policies and procedures in place where everything's documented, as opposed to being outsourced to trusted individuals or otherwise not part of a process. That's been a key theme for us throughout my time at Freshly. It's one of the reasons why we established like a quality assurance program when we only had 6 agents, which is not typical. Most people can wait longer, or if they do have a quality assurance program, it's more like qualitative monitoring, where you have someone who's monitoring a call and sits down as a coaching session, as opposed to outlining, what are the principles, or let's have a scoring system and things of that nature. But the idea was to try to get ahead of the curve, knowing that we would expand quickly, and going through the process of establishing what standards of excellence are, so that we're not playing catch up later when we have 40, 50, 60 agents, and now we're trying to impose standards upon them, and there are already bad habits that have gotten in there, and it's much more work to get agent best practices. We'd rather have those there as part of the training process, as we're bringing all these new people on, so we're all on the same page and we all are aligned as to what our customers value. We've taken that model and we've focused in a lot of areas. We developed a very clear performance evaluation process for agents from the get-go, and various contact channels where they're rated on 3 metrics in each contact channel, and those are openly advertised to them. So agents don't exist in a vacuum, and they clearly know what they're being rated on and why. We've taken certain cultural metrics, like we have a company cultural values, and we rate agents on those on a monthly basis. So that's also surfaced to agents and kind of keeps them focused on being a good member of a team. We had procedures in place for documenting processes and procedures as they were being created. So we have a record of, and here are the actors who need to be involved, and here are the resources you need, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This really held us very well in a case like this, where with relatively short notice, as I'm sure it was for many companies, as it certainly was for us, adjusting to the pandemic and moving people to remote work status and so forth was not something which was even in anyone's remote planning. And the speed at which it happened required some degree of agility, and having that infrastructure already available allows you to prevent people from crashing into each other and maintain a semblance of organization, even when things get tough and you have to deal with uninvited problems.
That's amazing. As I listen across those responses and I think about the conversation that we've been having, we've touched on all the fundamental pillars of CX, the idea of a customer-centric culture, a governance strategy for that, the journey mapping, the voice of the customer, the employee experience, and thinking about all of that. One thing that we didn't talk as much about, we talked a little bit about metrics. We didn't talk as much about ROI. And that's a big topic most of the time. It's not really an empathy topic, but I want to ask you guys, what questions are you seeing in your organizations about the ROI of your CX efforts, both now and what you perceive as we come through the coming months? Colin, you want to?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think where ROI fits in empathy, it's kind of an indirect relationship, I guess you can say. We could have done this to some extent where you're trying to understand by increasing empathy, however it's so defined. And we can do that to some extent through our QA program and seeing changes in scores over time, or identifying agents who have higher ratings than others. And then seeing, from the interactions those agents have with customers, or do we see higher retention among those customers after they have issues and things of that nature? So there are definitely ways you can do it, but it's very, very admittedly hard to pinpoint the actual value you get from empathy per se. I think one of the big things for us is kind of on the outskirts of empathy, and someone mentioned it in the questions that were asked after my presentation when someone asked about chatbots. And I think that's actually an example of where ROI and empathy connect, because the real question is, how are you using your agents? I know a lot of companies would probably readily admit that if you look at all the different types of issues that are coming in, there's a good number of those issues that are relatively basic in nature, that could be solved through more automated processes, which could involve removing an agent entirely, or just involve certain processes like robotic process automation that assist agents in being able to solve them faster with a click of a button, as opposed to having to do 40 clicks and go to some order management system and do this and do that and do something else. So technology, I think, is really helping justify expense on empathy by decreasing expense on the less empathy needy procedures and issues that customers face. And that's where we have tried our very best to try to justify the value that we're putting in those soft skills and those intangibles by saying, look, we're getting all this savings from a chatbot and from being able to deflect certain contexts. And now we're going to use those savings not to say, okay, well, let's now, let a whole bunch of people go, but let's use those savings to take these people and invest in more retention specific endeavors that we can ultimately build ROI around. But let's reinvest those funds there. So it's not a massive increase in money for the company, but rather taking money that we're saving over here and investing it in empathy, and then on trying to define the ROI that we get from those endeavors.
That's awesome. Andrea, can I come to you on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, Colin, what you said really resonated with me, that it's hard to put a pin in valuing doing the right thing almost. And how do you? And the approach that we've taken at Key is that we want to do the right thing by our employees first and by our communities as well. Something that Key has invested in is the stand-up process of the Paycheck Protection Program. I'm sure all of you are familiar with that, at least from watching the news, and maybe friends or family members have experienced applying for that. It was a really big project to have a bank, and all of you know banks are not known to move quickly, but to have a bank move quickly to be able to stand up a process to have clients apply for a loan that was going to save a small business to be able to pay their employees over the course of who knows how long. And Key was able to do that. And, we went 100% in on the Paycheck Protection Program. And we did that because we knew it was the right thing to do. We knew that we needed to support our clients and our communities. And that's something that's really important to us. But it is hard to put a value on that. What do you hope that it's the right thing and that you're doing the best that you can and that others will see that. I think back towards the beginning of the pandemic. I don't know if any of you will remember this, but there were many news stories about companies who were not having to have their employees come in because they just weren't busy, and they were also closing down. Dick's Sporting Good comes to mind. And Dick's made the public announcement that they would be paying their employees for the times that they were scheduled to work, even though they weren't working. Seems like ancient history now, even though it was only a couple of weeks ago. But that played out really well in the press, and the fact that they did the right thing by their employees. And there's been countless other stories. Texas Roadhouse, the CEO of the company forego his salary for the entire year in order to ensure his frontline staff was paid. It's those types of stories that we see that make headlines that I think, and again, this is not any research that's been conducted, but I think all of us would agree, would make us feel a little bit better about spending money with a company that was doing the right thing. And that's what we hope to see at Key as well.
So we're thinking empathy from our customers for us, in addition to the opposite.
Yes.
Ken, connecting ROI and empathy.
Yeah, Greg, thanks. Two things here, and I'll caveat my answer by saying that I think healthcare is always sort of trending behind when it comes to customer service and design and empathy, which is odd because you would think that empathy and healthcare should go hand in hand, right? So two things. Number one, I think that all of our organizations are spending a lot more money in technology and in the data inputs. So understanding where are the calls coming from, where are the issues, where are we falling down, what's taking longer than it should take. All of those data points are being measured and collected and measured. And number two, we are investing heavily in human-centered design. And we're doing that for a couple of reasons. Number one, we're doing this investment in human-centered design to try to push toward a more consumer-centric and employee-centric culture. We're a long way from that, but we are getting better and better as we're seeing what changes can happen, whether it's through ROI or just through anecdotal evidence. And so when you put those two together, the data inputs, and then say, how do we go about changing this? Well, let's throw human-centered design at it and see, let's go talk to customers. Let's go see how they live. Let's go really understand what's going on in their lives and how we can better serve them. That's where you really get the ROI. And, I would say, Colin mentioned in his presentation that they just started, empathy as a measure back in 15 or 16. I believe it was 16. And I think 5 or 6 years ago, if you sort of surveyed the C-suite of any company in any industry, those executives probably wouldn't even know what empathy was. And so we've come a long way. And I think that now that we're getting more data in, and we'll be able to say, how do we affect change? How do we bring more empathy to change the customer behavior or to change the customer view of us? I think now we'll be able to give a better answer to the what ROI are you getting? How do you measure it? And how do we know that it's working? It is working, but I think it's mostly anecdotal right now.
I made it all that way without messing up my mic. So, can I do a quick round robin? What advice do you have to your CX peers? Kent.
I would say new world, new life. We need to be focused on future of, not our past at all. We need to say when we come back, when we are, and it's not when we come back, because that is assuming that we're sort of stepping backwards. I would say how might we design our future, design our future customer experience, consumer experience, and how does that look different? Because it will look different tomorrow than it does today, or then, vastly different than it did yesterday. So look forward, not backward.
Colin, your advice.
Yeah, I would say, especially in regards to empathy in this current time, key thing is in order to push and champion empathy, you really need to break it down and define what it means. Because it's one thing to just kind of use the word, and it's, people generally have an understanding, a logical understanding of what empathy is, but when you want to operationalize it and you want to bring it to a customer support organization and infuse it in the culture, you really need to break it down as to what does empathy mean for your customers, and what do they need from you, and what are examples of those actions that agents can take. Because if you can't break it down on a granular level, then it kind of just lives in the world of theory. And if it's stuck in the world of theory, you'll never really be able to infuse it in your organization.
That's awesome. Andrea, your advice.
I would echo what Colin just said. And I think by breaking it down is making it tangible. And the example I gave with the tube thing, and if anyone knows what it's called, you can put it in the chat. But, the tube thing that goes from the car to the teller, just by showing that has been clean, just that type of action is what our clients want. And I would recommend that you really listen to what it is that they want. And they'll tell you without even asking them the question, because they're going to be putting that in their feedback to you through surveys or through the phone calls. They're going to let you know what their expectations are. So just be open to listening to them. And I wanted to touch on something Kent said earlier. I think, Kent, you were saying that many of your team has small children at home. So now people aren't just working at home, but they're teaching at home and they're doing everything. I think that's important as well, is just to not just acknowledge that, but to really get it. You get it, that it's not just your normal 9 to 5 in the office anymore, but things are different. And we're all wearing many hats. So just to continue to break that down, like Colin was saying, and how do you break that down? What do you do?
Yeah. My words of advice: keep up the good fight. Customer experience can help us all come through this and recover well. We've set up a website at CXPA, cxbuildsresilience.com. Share your ideas, share those ideas, and let's advance empathy, recovery, and CX together. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Greg, for moderating this very lively panel discussion. It looks like we're coming to the end of our time, so I'd like to thank our panelists for a wonderful discussion, and thank you again, Colin, for your presentation earlier. A big thank you to our audience for taking the time to join us today, all the way, from Toronto, from LA, all the way from the south of France. Thank you again. I hope everyone was able to take away some new insights and learnings. I'd also like to take this time to remind our audience that the Strategy Institute will be hosting webinars over the coming weeks, and we hope that you can join us next time. Please feel free to stay in the room. We have the room for about 7 more minutes, and I encourage you to continue engaging with the other attendees and with our presenters. Goodbye for now, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Thank you. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, presenters.
Thanks, everyone.
Colin, I think Freshly is doing an awesome job with what really stood out to me was when you were saying that you were allowing your folks that are working from home to be able to select things to make life easier. I thought that was really cool. Well done.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. It's definitely interesting times and been an interesting journey. And it's always interesting to hear, as you were talking, how empathy is realized in such very different ways in different industries. And Like you mentioned that tube thing, whatever it's called, is just a great example of how you wouldn't think that that would be impactful to someone, but
Right.
then logically it makes sense when you think about it. And I guess that's what it kind of comes down to at the end of the day, that empathy really is logical. If you just don't have to overthink it too much, and just sit back and let logic take hold and not be too corporate-y about it, I guess you can say.
Yeah, I like that word.
Listen and observe really well, right?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Hi guys, I'm back. I'm actually going to just go to our Q&A section. We do have a few more moments left. There is a question from Jill M. Have any of your customers asked for any sort of financial concessions during this time? If so, what have your organizations done to help meet their needs? We'd like to take that one.
I'll start. I mean, we have the Blue Cross Blue Shield, at least in the U.S., has removed copays and prior authorizations and even some testing costs as they relate to COVID. And I think we were sort of the first mover on that. And it's like this was completely this pandemic was completely unexpected. Not completely, but it was unexpected. And so we've taken many of those costs out of the health insurance equation.
Yeah, I'd say on our end, it's been sporadic and case by case. So there are individual cases where we've acted to try and assist customers. So we do that and have done that, but not like en masse in any sort of structured format per se.
There's no fees in banking, so I don't know. I can't answer that question. Just kidding. There are certainly concessions that have been asked for, but similar to what Colin just said, there's nothing been en masse, like what Kent's example was, just removing copays for a certain pocket. We have not done that, but we have made concessions, and when our clients are contacting us, we are waiving fees in order to accommodate them during this time, because we know that it's tough. And so that is something that we're doing. Another example, and I think this has been done by many banks, is in regards to the stimulus checks. A certain pocket of folks who were already in the negative in their checking account. If you think about what would happen if you were to get a deposit of $1,200, and let's say you were already at negative $200, then your stimulus would only be for $1,000. That didn't sit right with many in the banking industry, and he stepped up and said, we are going to allow the client to have that full stimulus amount, because that's the intention of it, is to be able to have that in the customer's pocket. So that's another example of concessions that have been made.
Great. Does anyone else have anything to add? I'm going to take that as a no. Okay, I think.
Hey, there is one other question that asks if we test our consumer journeys with customers, and I was going to say absolutely we do. That is so important, and we test them early on when we're just prototyping different interactions. You've got to go out to real customers. I'm not a fan of not much of a fan of behind the glass testing, but I do think that you have to really understand your customers, how they're going to react, what their thoughts are, what questions come up. You have to do it. It's a must.
Oh. We have one more from Manny D. What chat companies do you utilize or have checked out? Colin, would you like to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, we use for our CRM customer service wise Zendesk across the board. So we use Zendesk Chat. And I mentioned before, we do have a chat bot that we use on our site as well, powered by a company called Matomi. That means anything to you.
Great. Anything else to add? Again, thank you so much to everyone today, to the audience, to Colin, Andrea, Kent, Greg. Thank you so much for joining us, and I really hope everybody takes away some learnings and insights from today's discussions. Thank you again, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Much.
Bye.
Thank you.